Subscribe if you hate Karens and comment where you're watching this video from. The initial shock of finding Karen in my basement was quickly replaced by a simmering rage. It wasn't just the audacity of her being there, sprawled on my beanbag, while gorging on my Oreos, but the utter contempt in her eyes when she accused me of breaking and entering. "Ownership is a mindset," she'd sneered, a phrase that echoed in my head like a broken record. I mean, who says that? I spent years saving for this place, slaving away at my IT job, meticulously budgeting every penny. It wasn't some abstract concept. It was concrete, legal, and documented. But the truly infuriating thing was the racial undercurrent. Her comments, on Halloween, calling me urban for handing out full-sized candy bars, always felt like a dog whistle, a subtle jab masked as neighborly concern. Now, seeing her surrounded by trash bags overflowing with my belongings, using the accusation of racial intimidation to deflect from her own blatant criminal activity, solidified my understanding of her motives. It wasn't just about squatting. It was about asserting some twisted sense of superiority, a warped belief that she was somehow entitled to take what wasn't hers, simply because of who she was and what she perceived me to be. The arrival of the police was a momentary relief, quickly dashed when I saw the officer's initial skepticism. He seemed primed to believe Karen's fabricated narrative, a common experience I'd read about and seen on the news, but never imagined experiencing firsthand. My heart hammered in my chest as I presented my ID, the title deed, the mortgage, documents, tangible proof of my ownership, desperately hoping it would be enough. Watching the Nest app footage, a grainy, time-stamped record of Karen's surreptitious entry, yoga mat in tow, felt like watching a lifeline being thrown. The officer's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of doubt replacing the initial suspicion. The relief was profound, but short-lived. I knew in those fleeting moments, before the full scope of Karen's deception unraveled, that this was just the beginning of a very long, very strange ordeal. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or a simple misunderstanding. This was something far more calculated and, frankly, insane. As the officer questioned Karen, her story morphed and twisted like a vine, each iteration more outlandish than the last. Seeking refuge, she claimed, her voice dripping with false sincerity. From what? The inherent privilege of living in this neighborhood? Then came the HOA excuse, a completely fabricated claim that they had granted her verbal permission to reside in my basement. I could practically see the steam coming out of my ears. The HOA president, a retired colonel with a penchant for perfectly manicured lawns, would have had a conniption fit if he'd known someone was squatting in anyone's basement, let alone mine. The abandonment argument was perhaps the most absurd. Apparently, not using the basement regularly constituted grounds for forfeiture. By that logic, my perfectly functional car in the garage, only driven on weekends, was fair game for anyone with a free key and a penchant for road trips. I wanted to scream, to point out the sheer ridiculousness of her claims, but I knew it was better to let her dig her own grave. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a random act of desperation. It was a pattern, a carefully constructed web of lies designed to exploit the system and manipulate people's perceptions. When the second police car arrived, a seed of apprehension began to bloom in my stomach. It wasn't just the growing realization that this woman was completely unhinged. It was a sense of something bigger, something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. The way the officer radioed in, the hushed tones, the request for Karen to sit down. It suggested something more than a simple trespassing charge was brewing. The warrants, when they were finally revealed, were a gut punch. 2 counties over. This wasn't just a local nuisance. This was a professional. And the fact that this wasn't her first rodeo only confirmed my growing suspicion that Karen had been planning this for a while. The creepy sticky notes in her fort, the constant glares from across the street, the missing food. It all suddenly made sickening sense. The revelation of Karen's Nomadic Goddess of the Suburbs blog was like a punchline no one saw coming, a dark, surreal joke that shattered the remnants of any semblance of normalcy. A blog dedicated to squatting? I couldn't wrap my head around it. It was like stumbling upon a secret society of housecrashers, a clandestine network of suburban infiltrators operating under the guise of spiritual access and universal energy. The image of her sitting in my basement, meticulously documenting her manifestation of property access, sent shivers down my spine. The blog posts detailing how to identify vulnerable targets, exploit legal loopholes, and manipulate social perceptions in affluent neighborhoods were chillingly pragmatic. The sheer audacity of it all, the meticulous planning, the brazen execution, the unwavering belief in her own twisted logic, was both terrifying and strangely fascinating. My House, Chapter 8. In her deranged saga was reduced to a case study, a trophy in her twisted game. The stolen packages found in her trash bags were a minor detail in the grand scheme of her crimes, but they spoke volumes about her character. Not only was she squatting and lying to the police, but she was also stealing my mail, pilfering my deliveries like some sort of suburban pirate. The custom welcome mat, bearing the inscription Karen's Place, was the final absurd flourish, a testament to her delusional sense of entitlement. It was like she was trying to rewrite reality, to literally stamp her name onto a life that wasn't hers. The utter lack of self-awareness was staggering. As the police catalogued her belongings, each item a further indictment of her crimes, I started to feel a strange mixture of anger, disbelief, and a perverse sense of morbid curiosity. Who was this woman, really? What drove her to live this bizarre, nomadic existence, preying on the unsuspecting residents of suburbia? Seeing Karen, being handcuffed on my front lawn, screaming about real estate colonialism and Wi-Fi immunity, was a scene straight out of a bizarre comedy. The fact that my neighbor was live-streaming the whole thing only amplified the surrealness of the moment. I'm a pretty private guy, and it's all being filmed for the world to see. I could hear the neighbor, Mrs. Davidson, providing running commentary, her voice a mix of shock and amusement. Oh my stars, she's claiming Wi-Fi makes her immune. I always knew she was strange, but this is a whole new level. The video going viral, exploding across social media platforms and news outlets, was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it validated my experience, confirming that I wasn't going crazy and that Karen's behavior was truly extraordinary. On the other hand, it thrust me into the spotlight, transforming my quiet suburban life into a public spectacle. The headlines were sensational. Basement bandit busted. Woman claims suburban squatting is spiritual right, and nomadic goddess of the suburbs nabbed in squatting scheme. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with texts, emails, and social media notifications. Friends and colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, eager to express their disbelief and offer support. The internet, of course, had a field day. Memes featuring Karen's screaming face flooded social media, juxtaposed with images of stolen Oreos and yoga mats. The nomadic goddess of the suburbs blog was dissected and ridiculed, its outlandish theories and questionable advice becoming the subject of endless parodies. While the attention was overwhelming, I couldn't deny a certain sense of satisfaction. Karen, who had prided herself on manipulating perceptions and controlling narratives, had been utterly exposed. Her twisted philosophy, her carefully constructed facade, had crumbled under the weight of its own absurdity. The aftermath of Karen's arrest was surprisingly exhausting. Dealing with the police, insurance, and the constant stream of media inquiries became a full-time job. I had to hire a cleaning service to decontaminate my basement, removing all traces of her presence and restoring some semblance of normalcy to my home. The thought of someone having lived in my house, touching my belongings, violating my privacy in such a brazen way, left me feeling violated and uneasy. I spent hours scrubbing the walls, throwing away the blanket fort, and burning the sticky notes with their bizarre affirmations. It felt like I was exorcising a demon, cleansing my home of her negative energy. Replacing the locks and reinforcing the windows provided a sense of security, but the unease lingered. I found myself jumpy at night, constantly checking the doors and windows, listening for any strange noises. It took weeks before I could finally sleep soundly in my own bed without a nagging sense of anxiety. The legal proceedings were equally draining. I had to provide statements, testify in court, and navigate the complexities of the justice system. Karen, predictably, continued to maintain her innocence, claiming that she was a victim of systemic oppression and that her actions were justified by her spiritual beliefs. Her lawyer, a flamboyant character with a penchant for conspiracy theories, argued that my house was part of a larger global conspiracy to deny indigenous people their rightful land. I just wanted it all to be over so I could get my life back to normal. I missed the simple things: going to work, watching a movie, hanging out with fiends, and eating string cheese. Simple pleasures that were so easily taken from me. As time passed, and the initial shock of Karen's invasion faded, I started to see the humor in the situation. What had started as a nightmare was now a bizarre anecdote, a story I could tell to friends and family to elicit gasps of disbelief and peals of laughter. The idea of a self-proclaimed nomadic goddess of the suburbs squatting in my basement, stealing my Oreos, and claiming Wi-Fi immunity was simply too absurd not to find funny. I eventually decided to turn my experience into a stand-up routine, a cathartic exercise that allowed me to process the trauma and reclaim the narrative. Stepping onto the stage at the local open mic night, I felt a rush of adrenaline and a sense of nervous anticipation. I started by describing my house, my mundane IT job, and the quiet suburban life I had worked so hard to achieve, setting the stage for the chaos that was about to unfold. As I recounted the details of Karen's squatting scheme, the room erupted in laughter. The audience roared as I mimicked her voice, described her blanket fort, and recounted her outlandish claims. People resonated with my story. It was a fun but relatable experience to all people. Even now it gives me a good laugh. But it's also a reminder to be careful. Not everyone is who they seem to be.